one of the stars of the reality show Duck Dynasty, has died. His family says he died yesterday, months after it was announced that he had Alzheimer's disease. Robertson was 79 years old.
The Duck commander lived in a swamp with almost nothing, yet his final will just left his family in tears. It was not his death or the millions of dollars that crushed them. It was a hidden name on the legal papers that changed their legacy forever. Who is this secret person from his wild past? And why did Phil Robertson wait until the end to address it? Before revealing the identity behind this shocking secret, we have to go back to the day the Louisiana swamp went completely silent. The start of the end. On May 25th, 2025, the news of Phil Robertson's death broke the internet on a quiet Sunday morning. The man who brought the Louisiana swamp into living rooms across the globe passed away at the age of 79. Phil wasn't just a reality star, he was the epitome of what the American dream was. When his family announced his death, there were a ton of reactions, not just from fans alone, but also high-profile dignitaries, from governors to country music stars, and down to the everyday hunters who bought his duck calls for decades. The Robertson family also took a hard hit, and Phil spent his last days surrounded by them, and they described his death as peaceful. While the family grieved in private, their driveway and the Duck Commander headquarters quickly turned into a memorial. Fans didn't want to be left out without paying tributes to their idol. However, as the initial shock began to fade, a different kind of story started to emerge. People expected the family to be heartbroken because they lost their leader. What they did not expect was the intense emotional reaction that followed the reading of his final wishes. Phil was known for being a straight shooter who did not care much for money, yet his will contained details that left his heirs completely stunned. The world saw a rugged outdoorsman who conquered television, yet his family was looking at a man who had been quietly preparing for an end they were not ready to face. From the look of things, it seemed they weren't only emotional about the loss of their father, they were more concerned about a secret that Phil had been hiding from the cameras for years. The secret daughter. Phil was one guy that always liked to talk about how his life was back then before he gave his life to Christ in the 70s. Most people thought they knew the whole story, but everything changed in 2020 when a woman named Phyllis reached out to the family. She had taken a DNA test through a site called 23andMe and discovered a shocking connection. She was Phil's biological daughter from an affair he had in the 1970s. It was a reveal that could have easily torn a famous family apart, but it didn't. Instead of hiding the news, the Robertsons opened their doors to Phyllis, and just like that, she went from being a complete stranger to a beloved sister and a regular guest on the Unashamed podcast. Phil did not stop at simply welcoming her into the family home. When he decided to finalize his legal affairs, he made a very bold demand. He insisted that Phyllis be treated as an heir just like his other children. This meant she would receive an equal share of his millions and a part of his Louisiana acreage. Phil viewed this decision as much more than a simple financial distribution. To him, it was redemption and a final act of repentance for the mistakes he made during his wild years. He was determined to make things right and ensure his daughter was cared for before he passed. It, however, took the Robertson brothers a long time to adapt to the change. They had spent their entire lives building the family brand and working the land alongside their father. Now, they were being asked to share that legacy with a sister they barely knew. Even though the brothers were incredibly supportive, the reality of the situation was undeniably heavy for Phil's wife, Miss Kay, to bear. Miss Kay had been through every high and low imaginable with Phil. She stood by him during the dark years when he was a struggling tavern owner with a temper, and she was right there when he transformed into a world-famous man of faith. Their 50-year marriage was built on a foundation of hard work and forgiveness. Because of this, the way Phil handled his estate was designed to protect her before anyone else. He was very specific about the legal structure of their assets. He wanted to guarantee that Kay would never have to leave the river or the home they shared. To Phil, Kay was the queen of the swamp, and his final documents were a shield to keep her life exactly as she liked it. The most surprising part of all of this was Kay's reaction to the discovery of Phyllis. Most people would expect a wife to feel hurt by a secret from the past, yet Kay saw it as a blessing. She frequently described Phyllis as the daughter she had always prayed for. In fact, Kay was one of the loudest voices, making sure Phyllis received an equal share of the fortune. The family tree had grown a new branch very late in the game, and it changed the entire landscape of their inheritance. Before his death, Phil revealed he was battling the early stages of Alzheimer's in late 2024. For a man who built an entire career on his quick wit and sharp storytelling, this was a heavy blow. Regular listeners of the Unashamed podcast had already started to pick up on small changes. Phil would repeat a story he told minutes ago or struggle to find a word that used to come easy to him. His sons noticed these subtle changes long before anyone else did, which was why they made a collective decision to protect their father's dignity. They did not want the world to see him as anything less than the strong leader he had always been. Phil knew he didn't have much time until he couldn't think clearly about anything, and he sure did not sit around waiting for the lights to go out. Instead, he started a podcast called At Home with Phil, where he spent his last lucid months recording hours of video and audio. He wanted to make sure his voice and his message lived on even when his memory failed him. This project became another stream of wealth for the family. As his memory started to fail, Phil developed a new obsession with getting his estate in order. For a man who spent most of his life ignoring bank statements and legal documents, this change was surprising. He was determined to make sure every acre of land and every dollar earned from the duck calls was accounted for. The $15 million fortune. Phil Robertson's personal bank account held somewhere between $10 and $15 million at the time of his passing. While that is a life-changing amount for most people, it was only a small slice of the overall Robertson brand, which was valued at nearly $100 million. What most people forget is that Phil's road to wealth and success started with a massive rejection, and he got there by taking one of the biggest risks in sports history. Back in college, he was the starting quarterback at Louisiana Tech, and his backup was none other than future NFL legend Terry Bradshaw. Phil chose to walk away from a potential NFL career because the football season got in the way of duck season. Friends and coaches thought he was out of his mind. Now, looking at his bank account decades later, it is hard to say he made a mistake. That decision gave him the time to perfect the duck commander call in a small backyard shed during the 1970s. Phil spent years hand-carving duck calls and selling them out of his truck. By the time A&E had their eyes and cameras on Duck Dynasty, the business was already a success, yet the show took things to another level. During the peak of the show, the family was pulling around $200,000 per episode. On top of that, Phil's book, Happy, 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 also became a bestseller for months. These royalties created a massive retirement fund that kept growing even after the show went off the air. Despite the millions flowing into his accounts, Phil never changed who he was. His bank account and lifestyle stayed on two completely different tracks. Phil remained a man of simple habits, as he did not care for a lot of things. You'd expect a man with $15 million to live in a mansion. However, Phil chose to stay in the same modest Louisiana home he had lived in for decades. He did not care about showing off to the world. Even as his family built a massive media empire, Phil refused to carry a cell phone or own a computer. He lived in a world of high-tech deals while remaining completely off the grid. He often joked that if someone really wanted to talk to him, they would just have to find him in the woods. His wardrobe told the same story. You would never find a designer suit or expensive shoes in his closet. He stuck to camouflage and work boots because they were practical for the swamp. While other celebrities were dining at five-star restaurants, Phil was usually eating whatever he caught in the water or shot in the trees. By hunting squirrels, ducks, and fish for almost every meal, he saved an incredible amount of money over the years. This was part of his philosophy known as river wealth. Phil believed that numbers in a digital bank account were not real. To him, true riches were found in the dirt and the timber. He preferred owning acres of swamp where he could hunt over having a fancy stock portfolio. Because he spent so little of what he earned, his personal wealth grew into a massive surplus. When the time came to settle his affairs, the total amount sitting in his accounts was far higher than anyone expected. He had been quietly accumulating funds while living like a man with nothing to his name, which was why he left so much money for his family after he passed away. Along with the money, Phil left behind secret letters written specifically for his wife. These notes were filled with personal thoughts and guidance for the years ahead. Since Phil was a man who often preferred hunting to long conversations about feelings, these letters became her most prized possession. The reading of the will felt more like a final love letter to his wife and children than it was a legal proceeding. Phil had been a loving father and husband while he was alive and even in death. From the will, it was obvious that he was still looking out for them, and it evoked a lot of emotions on the day of the proceedings. Miss Kay was not the only one struggling to keep it together. Even Willie Robertson, Phil's third son and the business-minded leader of the family, had to face a new reality. As the CEO, Willie might have known the ins and outs of the business, but he wasn't prepared for what his father demanded of the company's future. The business handover. When Phil was alive, Willie had always been a bright mind and marketer of the Duck Commander empire for years. While Willie was used to dealing with high-level contracts and marketing strategies, he was caught off guard by the specific instructions Phil left for the company's future. Phil did not care about the profit margins or expanding into new markets as much as he cared about the spiritual aspect of the brand. His final directive was that the business had to remain a platform for their faith first and before anything else. One of the most emotional parts of these instructions involved the people who worked behind the scenes. Phil shared a deep connection with the staff at the West Monroe warehouse. Many of these employees had been with the family since the early days when they were still working out of a shed. Phil used a portion of his fortune to create a safety net for these workers. Even before he got sick, he had planned their long-term security so that his passing would not threaten their livelihoods. There were also unverified rumors that Phil had also put out a strict no-sell clause in his final wishes. If these rumors are true, then it would seem Duck Commander wanted the business to stay in the family for generations to come. Today, the company continues to thrive through innovations like the Jays Robertson Pro Series. These new products keep the estate funded and the family mission moving forward. Yet, as the family looked closer at the legal documents, they realized the business was only one part of the story. Beyond the duck calls and the camouflage, there was a massive real estate portfolio that few people ever knew existed. It seemed the most valuable part of Phil's fortune was right under his boots. Phil Robertson had spent 50 years buying up as much land in Louisiana as he could find. He had never really been interested in high-rise buildings or stocks. He was just always focused on timber and swamp. Over those 5 decades, he quietly stitched together a massive amount of acreage. While it might look like messy wetlands, it was a total goldmine to hunters in the game. This land became the backbone of his wealth. But it wasn't all areas of the land that contributed to his wealth. There were some areas that Phil labeled as holy grounds, which had strict orders to keep bulldozers or potential developers away. These were places where he felt closest to God, and he wanted them to stay untouched forever. From the way he divided his assets, you could tell he didn't want his children fighting over boundaries or property lines once he was gone. He carefully partitioned the land among his 4 sons and his daughter, Phyllis. By giving everyone an equal stake in the family's physical roots, he made sure the bond between the siblings stayed solid. This land is now worth much more than the cash sitting in his bank accounts because of the natural resources and the size of the holdings. All he wanted was to make sure that future generations of Robertsons would always have a place to hunt and fish. To Phil, the land was a gift from God and for his family. Inheriting those thousands of acres felt like a heavy responsibility. The physical land was the setting for the most emotional moment of all, Phil's private funeral service. The funeral. In June 2025, the Robertson family released a video that gave the world a glimpse into Phil Robertson's funeral held in the Louisiana woods. From the clips, each of his children had taken the center stage to give a eulogy about their father. Jace Robertson shared a story that resonated with anyone who grew up outdoors. He talked about how his father not only taught them how to hunt, but also how to survive. He also explained that the real weight of their inheritance was the knowledge Phil passed down. His children weren't the only ones who had good things to say about him. His grandchild, Sadie Robertson Huff, also had a few words of her own. As one of the most recognizable faces of the next generation, her tribute was especially moving. She shared the final words Phil whispered to her, which were, "Full strength ahead." Even Uncle Si, the man known for his tea jug and constant jokes, had a rare moment of vulnerability. Seeing Si break down while saying goodbye to the brother he worked with for decades was the moment that really shook the fans. It was a side of the Robertson family that the reality cameras rarely captured. While the family needed time to grieve in private, they also knew the fans needed a way to say goodbye. They managed to find a balance between a quiet family service and a larger public celebration of Phil's life. As the sun set over the swamp on the day of the service, it felt like the end of an era. Months after the funeral, the family began to realize that Phil's vision for the future was much bigger than they imagined. Duck Dynasty may have lost its king, but in 2026, the empire is staging a massive comeback. With the new hit series called Duck Dynasty: The Revival out, it has taken over the airwaves on A&E. This show follows the next generation of Robertsons as they find their way around life without Phil in the picture. With Sadie Robertson, Huff being the face of this new era, she's been able to get across to millions of younger fans with the same message of faith her grandfather preached for decades. The same also goes for the Unashamed podcast, which has found its new purpose. Phil might have left behind a lot of cash, but he also left warnings. He believed that money could easily ruin a person's spirit, and so in order to keep the family in check, he designed trust funds for his great-grandchildren. He wanted them to understand the value of a dollar and the importance of a humble heart. In a move that surprised many, the family also moved their focus toward philanthropic work in neurological health. They are using their inheritance to fight the battle against Alzheimer's in Phil's name. At the end, Phil Robertson won the game of life by staying true to his roots. What is the biggest lesson you have learned from the Robertson family over the years? The weight of the Robertson legacy. But the real reason the family cried wasn't because of the size of the fortune. It was because of the responsibility attached to it. Phil didn't just accumulate wealth through Duck Commander and television fame. He built a legacy wrapped in faith, discipline, and old-school grit. That kind of inheritance weighs heavier than any bank account. Every dollar represented decades of early mornings in the duck blind, risky business moves, public controversy, and unwavering conviction. For Willie, Jace, Jep, and the rest of the clan, stepping into that vacuum meant more than managing assets. It meant protecting a philosophy. Phil's brand was never polished Hollywood glamour. It was rough edges, swamp mud, scripture, and straight talk. The revival of the franchise isn't simply about ratings, it's about proving that the foundation he laid can stand without him physically present. Behind closed doors, the transition hasn't always been easy. Sources close to the family have hinted that there were deep conversations about how to modernize the empire without diluting it. The younger Robertsons understand social media, streaming audiences, and a faster cultural pace. But they also know that if they drift too far from Phil's blueprint, the entire structure could crack. That tension between evolution and tradition is now the defining challenge of the Robertson legacy. Sadie, in particular, represents that balancing act. She carries the warmth and faith of her grandfather, but she speaks to a generation raised on smartphones and global platforms. Through conferences, books, and the show's new direction, she has become a bridge between eras. And in many ways, that may be the most valuable part of Phil's inheritance: continuity. Financial analysts estimate the Robertson brand remains worth tens of millions, even after Phil's passing. But the family seems less focused on valuation and more focused on stewardship. Their decision to channel funds into Alzheimer's research has reshaped public perception, turning a reality TV dynasty into a cause-driven movement. It's a strategic pivot that adds depth to the empire. In the end, Phil Robertson didn't just leave behind land, royalties, and television contracts. He left behind a test of character, a test of unity, a test of whether the next generation can carry forward the spirit of a man who built everything from a duck call and a belief system. The tears at the funeral weren't just for a father or grandfather. They were for the weight of the mantle now resting on their shoulders. And if the early signs of 2026 are any indication, the Robertson family isn't just preserving the fortune, they're trying to honor the man who made it possible. Because in the end, Phil's greatest wealth wasn't measured in dollars or ratings, it was measured in conviction. And now, every business decision, every public statement, and every new venture quietly answers the same question: can they protect the heart of the empire without the man who built it? That question follows them into every board meeting and every family dinner. It lingers when contracts are signed and when cameras start rolling. The Robertson name is no longer just attached to duck calls and camouflage merchandise, it carries expectation. Fans expect authenticity, critics expect missteps, and the family knows that one careless move could tarnish something that took decades to build. There's also the emotional layer that outsiders rarely see. Grief doesn't pause for business strategy. While the public talks about valuations and revival ratings, the family is still navigating empty chairs at the table and quiet mornings without Phil's voice. Balancing mourning with momentum is a delicate act, yet in many ways, pushing forward may be their way of honoring him. If the next generation succeeds, it won't simply be because they inherited money. It will be because they understood the assignment. Phil built an empire rooted in belief and backbone. Now, the true measure of that fortune isn't in what they spend, it's in what they preserve. And preservation in today's world requires courage. Culture shifts fast, public opinion changes overnight. The Robertsons now face the challenge of staying relevant without surrendering the principles that made them stand out in the first place. That balancing act will determine whether Phil's legacy becomes a fading memory of reality TV history or a lasting blueprint for faith-driven entrepreneurship. And in many ways, the real inheritance isn't the land, the brand, or the royalties. It's the expectation to lead with the same boldness Phil carried his entire life. The family now stands at a crossroads, and how they move forward will define what the Robertson name truly means for generations to come. Let us know in the comments. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any of our videos. Thanks for watching.